The cold was a living thing. It seeped through the worn leather of Alara's boots, snaked up her spine, and settled deep in her bones, a familiar ache that had nothing to do with the encroaching winter. The real chill came from the circle of firelit faces around her, their laughter a wall of sound she could never penetrate. Here, at the heart of the Blackwood pack, she was an island of silence, adrift in a sea of snarling, joyful communion. They were celebrating the blood moon hunt, passing around roasted meat and skins of spiced ale. The air was thick with the scent of pine smoke, scorched venison, and the heady musk of shifter vitality. For everyone else, it was a scent of belonging. For Alara, it was a constant, suffocating reminder of what she lacked. Her wolf was silent. It had always been so. Since her first shift, a terrifying, solitary ordeal in the woods after her parents' death, she had never heard the voice of her inner beast. There was a presence, a warmth, a pool of quiet strength deep inside her, but it had no voice. In a world where a shifter's worth was measured by the strength and ferocity of their wolf, Alara was a broken thing. A mute. Look at her, Cale's voice cut through the revelry, sharp and cruel as a shard of ice. He stood near the fire, his broad shoulders and arrogant sneer making him the center of a sycophantic circle. The little ghost. Still waiting for a voice to answer that hollow in her head. Laughter rippled through his followers. Alara flinched, pulling her threadbare cloak tighter. She kept her eyes fixed on the dancing flames, praying for an invisibility she could never quite achieve. Leave her be, Cale. Lyra, one of the few who showed her any kindness, murmured from a nearby log. She's done you no harm. Cale scoffed, taking a swig of ale. She's a weakness in this pack. A flaw. What good is a wolf that cannot speak, cannot join the pack mind in a hunt? She's dead weight, he spat into the fire, the sizzle loud in the sudden lull. Our alpha is too soft. My father would have cast her out long ago. The words were stones, each one finding a tender place to bruise. She knew he was right, in a way. Alpha Marcus was a kind man, but his kindness was seen as weakness by ambitious wolves like Cale, whose father had once vied for leadership. Alara's presence was a constant source of contention, a symbol of Marcus's supposed failure to prune the pack of its weakest limbs. She felt a familiar, useless surge of anger. Her wolf wasn't weak. She could feel its power, coiled and patient, like a great serpent sleeping in the sun. It was strong, she knew it was. It just wouldn't speak. It was a lock without a key, a song without a voice. And without that voice, she was nothing. An omega by default, tasked with the pack's most menial chores, living on scraps of tolerance. A horn blew from the watchtower on the ridge, a long, piercing note that sliced through the night. The celebration died instantly. Heads snapped up, ears twitching. That wasn't a warning signal. It was a ceremonial call. One reserved for visitors of the highest rank. Alpha Marcus straightened from his place of honor, his face tight with surprise and concern. Sentries, report. A young wolf sprinted from the darkness into the firelight, panting as he skidded to a halt before the Alpha. Alpha. A royal envoy. They bear the sigil of the Alpha King. A collective gasp swept through the clearing. The Alpha King. Ronan. A name spoken in whispers, a figure of legend more than a man. He ruled all the packs of the Northern Territories, a king whose power was said to be absolute, his wolf a demon of shadow and fury. He hadn't visited a minor pack like Blackwood in a generation. Panic and awe on the faces around the fire. Mates pulled closer, elders straightened their spines, and warriors like Cale puffed out their chests, their ambition flaring like wildfire. For Alara, the panic was pure and undiluted. High-ranking visitors meant scrutiny. Scrutiny meant her flaw, her silence, would be laid bare for a new, more powerful audience. Her only defense was to disappear. She began to back away slowly, melting into the deep shadows at the edge of the clearing. The trees were her only allies, their quiet strength a comfort. But as she took another step, a wave of energy washed over the clearing, so potent it felt like a physical blow. It was power incarnate, a crushing pressure that demanded submission. The air grew heavy, crackling with an unseen storm. Every wolf, from the mightiest warrior to the smallest pup, instinctively lowered their heads, baring their necks. Elara's body tried to do the same, but something inside her refused. Her silent wolf, the quiet pool within, stirred. It didn't bow. It rose, not in challenge, but in recognition. A strange, resonant hum vibrated through her, a note she had never felt before. Through the trees at the main path, he emerged. The Alpha King was larger than the stories told, his presence filling the world, shrinking everything else around him. He moved with a liquid grace that belied his size, flanked by two guards whose eyes were cold chips of ice. His hair was the color of a moonless night, and his eyes, as they swept over the cowering pack, seemed to hold the gray fury of a winter storm. His gaze passed over the Alpha, the elders, the warriors. It was a dismissive, cursory glance. Then, his eyes found her. They stopped. Locked onto her where she stood half-hidden in the shadows. The world narrowed to the space between them. The crackling energy intensified, focusing into a laser-sharp beam aimed directly at her heart. The hum inside her crescendoed into a deafening thrum. It felt like a string on an instrument being plucked for the first time, a soundless vibration that shook her to her soul. The Alpha King took a step towards her. Then another. He ignored the pack Alpha, who was stammering a welcome, ignored the warriors trying to look impressive. He walked through them as if they were mist, his storm-grey eyes never leaving hers. A terrifying, exhilarating, and utterly alien sensation bloomed in her chest, a sense of being seen. Truly seen, for the first time in her life. And her silent wolf, for the first time, felt like it was leaning forward, listening. Waiting for a voice it could finally answer. The clearing was so quiet Elara could hear the frantic beat of her own heart. The Alpha King, Ronan, stood before her, a mountain of shadow and power. The air around him tasted of ozone and pine, a wild, clean scent that somehow calmed the frantic fluttering in her chest even as it amplified the thrumming deep within her. He was close enough now that she could see the flecks of silver in his grey eyes, like shards of a shattered star. "You," he said. His voice was a low rumble, a sound that seemed to vibrate not in her ears, but directly in her bones. It wasn't a question, or an accusation. It was a statement of fact. A discovery. Before she could find her voice, Kale stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of her, a sneering, protective posture that was entirely false. "Your Majesty," he said, his tone oozing a deference that didn't reach his eyes. "Pay her no mind. She is nothing. An omega with a broken wolf. A mute. She cannot even greet you properly." Ronan's gaze shifted to Kale. It was a slow, deliberate movement, and the drop in temperature was palpable. The casual authority he wore tightened into something lethal. "Did I speak to you?" The question was soft, almost conversational, yet it cracked through the clearing like a whip. Kale paled, the arrogance draining from his face to be replaced by primal fear. He was a powerful wolf, a future beater perhaps, but in the king's presence, he was a child. He swallowed hard and took a step back, his head bowing in submission. Ronan's attention returned to Elara, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. "What is your name?" "Elara," she whispered, her voice sounding small and thin, a bird's cry in a hurricane. "Elara," he repeated, and her name on his tongue was a different word entirely. It held weight, resonance. The hum inside her intensified, a warm current spreading through her limbs. "Your wolf is not broken." Again, a statement of fact, not an opinion. The certainty in his voice staggered her. How could he know? How could he say with such conviction what everyone else, including herself at times, believed to be a lie. He reached out, his movement slow, giving her time to retreat. She stood frozen as his fingers brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. The touch was electric. A jolt of pure energy shot through her, and for a breathtaking second, the silent space in her mind flared with a brilliant, voiceless light. It was like seeing a flash of lightning without hearing the thunder. He drew his hand back, his eyes dark with a dawning, incredulous understanding. He looked from her to Alpha Marcus, who was watching the exchange with a mixture of terror and confusion. "I will be staying for a few days," Ronan announced, his voice now carrying a formal, royal command that resonated across the pack. "I wish to inspect your territory borders at dawn. Elara will be my guide." The collective shock was a physical force. Murmurs erupted like wildfire. "Huh? The mute? Guide the king?" It was unthinkable. A dangerous honor, or a deliberate insult. Kael's head snapped up, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. "Your Majesty, with respect, she is unworthy. She is unfamiliar with patrol routes. I, as the lead enforcer, would be a much more suitable." "Your counsel was not requested," Ronan cut him off, his voice dropping back to that lethally soft tone. "My decision is made. Have quarters prepared for me and my guard. Elara, be ready at sunrise." He gave her one last, lingering look, a look that held 1,000 questions she couldn't begin to decipher. Then he turned and strode toward the Alpha's lodge, his guards falling into step behind him, leaving a stunned and resentful pack in his wake. Elara stood rooted to the spot, the phantom tingle of his touch still on her skin. The eyes of the pack were on her now, no longer with pity or casual scorn, but with suspicion and a sharp-edged jealousy. She had been invisible. Now, she was a target. The king's inexplicable interest had painted a mark on her back. As the pack members dispersed, whispering amongst themselves, Lyra rushed to her side. "Elara, what was that? The way he looked at you." "I don't know," Elara breathed, her mind reeling. The hum inside her had quieted, but it hadn't vanished. It remained, a low, steady vibration, like a promise of a song yet to be sung. Later that night, curled on her thin pallet in the communal Omega den, sleep was impossible. The whispers of the others were sharp as knives in the dark. "What does he want with her? It's a test. He's trying to shame our Alpha by choosing the weakest among us. Maybe he has a taste for broken things." Their words hurt, but they were drowned out by the echo of his. "Your wolf is not broken." He'd said it with the force of a royal decree. For the first time in a decade, a tiny, fragile seed of hope began to sprout in the barren wasteland of her heart. A hope so terrifying, she barely dared to acknowledge it. Why did he believe in her, when no one else ever had? What did the Alpha King see in a silent, outcast girl? She didn't know if she was more afraid of the answer, or of the possibility that there wasn't one at all. The forest was draped in a silver mist when Elara met Ronan at the edge of the camp. Dawn was a faint grey promise to the east. Ronan stood alone, his two guards posted discreetly nearby. He had shed his formal traveling leathers for practical gear that did little to disguise the coiled power in his frame. He watched her approach, his expression unreadable. "You're punctual," he observed. The deep timbre of his voice was less overwhelming in the quiet of the woods. "I know the forests," she said softly, it was the one place she felt competent. "The quiet suits me." He nodded, a small, accepting gesture. "Lead on." They walked in silence for a long time, the only sounds the crunch of their boots on fallen leaves and the distant call of a morning bird. Elara expected him to be impatient, to demand conversation, but he seemed content to match her pace, his presence a steady, comforting weight at her side rather than an oppressive one. The strange hum inside her was a constant companion, a warm current that seemed to flow between them in the space their bodies did not touch. As the sun climbed higher, Filtering through the dense canopy in golden shafts, he finally spoke. "Tell me about your wolf, Alara." Her throat tightened. It was the question she always dreaded. "There is nothing to tell. She is quiet." "Quiet is not the same as silent," he countered, his gaze fixed on the path ahead. "And silence is not the same as absence. When you shift, what do you feel?" No one had ever asked her that. They only ever asked what she heard. She hesitated, then decided to answer honestly. What did she have to lose? "I feel everything. The ground under my paws, the wind in my fur, the scent of a rabbit a mile away. I feel a strength that isn't my own. A certainty. A peace. It's like being whole. But when I try to reach for her, to speak with her, there's just a space. A quiet room." He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "It is not an empty room, is it? You feel a presence there." She stared at him, shocked. How did you know?" "Because I feel it too," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Ever since I arrived. A resonance. A quiet hum in the back of my own mind that I have never felt before. It gets stronger when I am near you." He took a step closer, and the hum inside her surged, a tide rising to meet his proximity. "The legends speak of it, but I never believed them. A bond so deep it precedes the voice. A connection of spirit, not of mind." Her heart hammered against her ribs. A bond? The legends were of fated mates, of two souls destined for each other. But those were for powerful alphas, for shifters whose wolves sang to each other across continents. Not for her. "That's impossible," she breathed. "My wolf is silent. I am no 1 inch." "You are not no one," he said, his voice fierce, protective. "You have been made to feel that way by wolves too blind to see true strength." He looked around the forest, a strange light in his eyes. "They hear a cacophony. A pack mind is a constant clamor of voices, of ego and fear and ambition. You have stillness. A core of absolute, untroubled power. They mock it because they fear it. They cannot comprehend a wolf that does not need to shout to know its own strength." A twig snapped behind them. They both turned, senses on high alert. Kale emerged from between two ancient oaks, a hunting bow in his hand and a cruel smile on his lips. Two of his cronies flanked him. Well, Kale drawled, his eyes flicking from Ronan to Alara with undisguised contempt. "Enjoying your little tour with the pack reject, Your Majesty. I was concerned for your safety." She can't even call for help if a rogue were to attack. Ronan's posture didn't change, yet the air around him became lethally still. "Your concern is noted. And dismissed. Return to the compound, Kale." "I don't think so," Kale said, his bravado fueled by a dangerous mix of jealousy and wounded pride. He took a menacing step toward Alara. "This has gone on long enough. We have traditions. A challenge to prove worth. It's time the king sees what this thing he's so interested in really is." He was posturing, trying to reassert his dominance in front of his packmates, goaded by the king's dismissal. He wouldn't dare attack the king, but her. She was fair game. "This ends now," Kale snarled, his eyes flashing. "Shift. Show the king the pathetic, silent beast you hide inside. Or I'll force it out of you." He lunged. Not with a bow, but with hands shifting into claws, aimed right for her throat. Time seemed to slow. Alara's mind screamed in terror, a desperate, silent shriek. She braced for the impact, for the tearing pain. But it never came. Instead, the hum inside her exploded. It wasn't a gentle vibration anymore, it was a cataclysm. A supernova of power erupted from the core of her being. And with it, for the first time, came a voice. It was not her voice. A word of pure, ancient command thundered through the forest, not through the air, but through the minds of every wolf present. Enough! The voice was a physical force, slamming into Kale and his followers like a battering ram. They were thrown backward, tumbling through the undergrowth as if struck by lightning. Kale lay stunned, his eyes wide with terror, blood trickling from his nose. Elara swayed on her feet, dizzy from the psychic backlash. The voice had come from inside her. From the quiet room in her mind. But it was not her wolf's voice. It was deep, resonant, and utterly familiar. It was the voice of the Alpha King. She looked at Ronan. He was staring at her, his face a mask of profound, world-altering shock. He took a staggering step back, one hand coming up to his temple as if to brace himself. The connection between them was no longer a subtle hum. It was a roaring, undeniable conduit of power, a bridge of light that had just been forged in fire. By the ancients, Ronan breathed, his eyes locking with hers. And in his mind, she heard him as clearly as if he'd shouted it. It's you. It has always been you. The forest was utterly still, the air thick with ozone and stunned silence. Kale and his lackeys were crumpled heaps on the forest floor, groaning, more shocked than physically injured. The psychic blow had been a command, not an attack, a deafening shout to a dog lunging at its master's mate. Elara's legs felt weak. She leaned against the rough bark of an oak, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and dawning, terrifying understanding. That voice. His voice. It had come from inside her, from the silent place where her wolf lived. It had spoken with her intent, her protective fury, but with his power, his authority. Ronan crossed the distance between them in 2 long strides. He stopped just before her, his hands hovering in the air, as if he were afraid to touch her, afraid she might shatter. His storm-grey eyes were wide with an emotion she couldn't name, awe, reverence, a bone-deep relief that seemed centuries old. The bond, he whispered, his actual voice hoarse. It's not just a resonance. It's a conduit. Your wolf wasn't silent, Elara. She was waiting. Waiting for the other half of her own voice. He reached out, slowly this time, and cupped her jaw. His touch no longer just sparked, it felt like coming home. The roaring conduit between their minds settled into a steady, powerful river of shared thought, shared emotion. She could feel his awe, his fierce protectiveness, his overwhelming joy, as if they were her own. And beneath it all, she could feel his wolf, a magnificent, ancient creature of shadow and storm, bowing its head to the presence inside her. Luna, his wolf's thought brushed against her consciousness. The word was a prayer. I don't understand, she whispered, her own voice trembling. The legends of the king's line are old, he explained, his gaze never leaving hers. They say that the first king's mate had a wolf so powerful, it didn't need to speak to its own pack. Its voice was one with the Alpha Kings, a single soul in 2 bodies, their commands issued as one. It was a power that united entire nations. I thought it was a myth. A story to bolster my family's claim to the throne. He shook his head, a disbelieving smile touching his lips. My wolf has been restless my entire life. Searching. He never felt whole, so he filled the emptiness with rage and duty. Until now. Until he found his echo. In you. Kale stirred, pushing himself up on his elbows. What sorcery is this, he spat, fear warring with his ingrained hatred. Ronan didn't even look at him. His focus was entirely on Elara. It's not sorcery. It is the oldest law. The law of the soul. He finally looked over his shoulder at the disgraced enforcer. You dared to lay a hand on your queen. The title hung in the air, heavier than any crown. Queen. Luna of the Alpha King. The idea was so preposterous, so far beyond the scope of her life as a broken omega, that Elara nearly laughed. But the truth of it was singing in her blood, a duet where there had only ever been a solo. Ronan's guards arrived then, crashing through the undergrowth, drawn by the psychic blast. They took in the scene, their king standing protectively over the Omega girl, the pack's lead enforcer on the ground, and immediately understood. They seized Kale and his men, hauling them to their feet. "Take them back to the compound," Ronan commanded, his voice ringing with an authority that left no room for argument. "Confine them. Their alpha will pass judgment. But if his judgment does not satisfy me, I will." As the guards dragged the struggling shifters away, Ilara finally let the weight of it all settle. All the years of mockery, of shame, of believing she was less than whole. It had all been a lie. A misunderstanding. Her silence wasn't a flaw. It was a sign of a power so profound, no one had recognized it. "They called me broken," she said, the words thick with unshed tears. "I believed them." "Then they are the broken ones," Ronan said fiercely, his thumb stroking her cheek. "Their sight is flawed, their instincts dull. They saw a quiet pool and thought it was shallow, never realizing it was a well so deep it reached the heart of the world." He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. The connection between them was a placid, beautiful lake. She could feel the edges of his thoughts, the texture of his emotions. Tentatively, she reached out with her own mind, not with words, but with a feeling of gratitude, of wonder, of a lifetime of loneliness beginning to ease. He shuddered, a soft gasp escaping his lips. "I feel you," his mind voice whispered, intimate and clear. "For the first time, I am not alone in my own head." Ilara took a shaky breath. Her wolf, her quiet, patient wolf, uncoiled within her. It wasn't a separate entity anymore. It was her, and it was a part of him. The quiet room in her mind now had an open door, and on the other side was a vast, powerful landscape that was Ronan's soul. She didn't need to shout. She just needed to be. Slowly, deliberately, she formed a word. She pushed it through the bond, a single, perfect thought offered from her to him. "Hello." The wave of emotion that came back from him was overwhelming. Decades of solitude, of the crushing weight of leadership, of a longing he never knew how to name, all of it washed away in a tide of pure, unadulterated joy. "There you are," his voice echoed in her soul, warm and certain and full of love. "I have been waiting for you my entire life." Hand in hand, they walked out of the woods and back toward the Blackwood packhouse. The sun was high now, burning away the last of the mist. For Ilara, it felt like the first true dawn of her life. The pack was gathered, a fearful, anxious crowd. When they saw her walking at the king's side, his hand holding hers, as if it were the most precious treasure in the world, a wave of understanding and terror washed over them. She was not the broken Omega anymore. She was not the silent girl. She was their queen. And her voice, united with his, would be the one to shape their world. The silence was over. The song was just beginning.